Hi guys, welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. Today is my review of Boosh, An Empire in Black and Gold, Book 1 of the Shadows of the Apt series by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Guys, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what I expected going into this book. All I knew is that I loved Tchaikovsky's writing in Guns of the Dawn, which is, my favorite standalone that I've read all year, and if not for the end of Long Price Quartet, would probably be my favorite book that I read this year. It's just so freaking good. And I hadn't read any other Tchaikovsky, but my Discord voted that we would read the first 4 books in the Shadow of the Apt for our next read-along after we finished Feb Rising and all the Red Rising books. And so, we started with this. This is his very first book, and it is the first in a 10-book series. And guys, Adrian Tchaikovsky is a genius. This is his first book, and it's this freaking good. This book hits so many things that I just personally love. Tchaikovsky's mind is so freaking creative, and it's just stuff I would have never thought about, and it just happens to be, it's so culturally rich and so interesting and such a fast-paced plot, and that it takes place in the middle of it's a war. Like halfway through this book, I realized, wait a minute, is this going to be 10 books of one war being fought? That is freaking awesome, and I'm upset that I didn't schedule a 10-book read-along for the channel just so I could make sure that I read all 10, but I will definitely be reading all 10. So, without wasting any more time,
Let's get down to business.
let's talk about Empire in Black and Gold. So the Shadows of the Apt series takes place, at least this first book, in the Lowlands. What's interesting about the setting is that the humans of this world have evolved kind of alongside insects, so they take both their appearance and their art, which is kind of a racial power that they can learn through like meditation and training, takes after the insect that their people kind of grew up alongside. So the important ones there's a ton, there's so many, like we're constantly learning about new kinden, as they're called. But the main characters in this is a beetle kinden named Stenwald Maker. They are members of the Apt races, and the Apt races are these races that are really good at technology. They were responsible for kind of like this technological revolution, and they used to be under this empire, or under this rulership of, they used to be slaves underneath the Moth Kinden, who are these like, these ancient kind of sorcerer people that now the Moths left are just kind of like, crazy old coots that are like, oh yeah, you're a shaman, whatever, and they hide in like the dark and stuff. But their law was enforced by the Mantis Kinden, who are just these brutal like fighters who are not good with technology, but they have like bone spurs on their arms, and they fight with both swords and these gloves that have this like retracting blade that looks like a mantis claw. Freaking awesome. But the Apt races, like the beetles and the ants, threw off the shackles of that rulership and, created a technological revolution, and now they're kind of like the ones who run civilization, if you will. And so Stenwald is a beetle kinden, and they're kind of apt, like, many of them can't fly, and if they do, beetles suck at flying. Mostly it's to like to stick to things, like they can hang like underneath technology, and they're also really good with, fixing things. They're mostly the tinkers of the races, and they're kind of like the ones that are advancing technology. And he is, the prologue starts immediately kind of setting the stage where it's Stenwald and some of his companions, this ant kinden, the ants remind me very much of the Greek city-states where they're constantly at each other's throats, but they're kind of like, they're ethnically the same, but also ethnically diverse, but they're these very like warrior city-states. So there's this ant named Marius and this mantis named Tissamon, and there's been a betrayal, and the city they're trying to defend from the advance of this far eastern empire of the Wasps, that city falls, and it collapses, and, some people die, but Stenwald escapes. And chapter 2 picks up 17 years later, where he is at the Collegium, which reminds me of kind of like the Athenian Academy, or the Roman Senate, where, if they talk a lot and have dialogues, and they're just all about the advancement of philosophy and civilization, and they don't listen to anything that Stenwald says about, hey, so by the way, the reports that keep coming in, because he's a spy master now, the reports that keep coming in say that the Wasps, they are going to continue moving this way. They're going to attack the Lowlands. And, you know, of course, they're like, oh, what are you kidding me? Now, the Wasps, they're the empire in black and gold, and they are very uniform and very, like, imperial, and they're, you know, one of their arts is they can fly, and their other art is their sting. The wasp sting is like these fireballs they can form in their hand and throw, and that's them stinging you. And so as Stenwald is trying to warn his people, and the people of the Collegium, about the advance of the Wasps, we also meet our four main characters, aside from Stenwald. His niece, who is another videogames like him. One of his students, Totho, who kind of seems like he's on the spectrum. Like, he's very awkward, and he's super obsessed with, like, machines and gadgets, and, like, only wants to talk to people about gadgets and, you know, his special interests. I don't know if it's intended that way, but that's how I felt. And he's a kind of a half-breed. He's half ant, half beetle, and, you know, they hate half-breeds. There's a lot of, like, thematic racism in this, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Then there's his ward, who is one of the spider-kinden, and the spider-kinden are from the deep south, and they're, like, very, like, noble, and they play, like, these political games that, like, involve, like, emotional and kind of, like, sexual manipulation. And they're, you know, known as being kind of like, you know, tricksy sorceresses. And so she's his ward, and she's an excellent swordsman. And then also someone who's come to study under him, and that is this prince of the Dragonfly Commonweal, which is this kind of like non-technological, very kind of like, it feels almost Eastern inspired. This nation that had been fighting with the Wasps for the last 12 years. And that war has, like, just concluded, and he's here to kind of learn from Stenwald, and he's very like, you know, he's the leaning type, if you will. Very charming, very, like, you know, all the girls kind of like, oh my gosh, Salma. And kind of the last main character of this book is a captain in the Wasp army, and that's Captain Thalric. And these, first of all, just starting off, these characters are so well done. For his first novel, Tchaikovsky has created really compelling characters that you root for. They are not the most unique, at least in, like, the kids, they are so well written, they feel like teenagers, because they are, without being incredibly annoying. And even when they annoy you, you're like, okay, like, they're teens, like, I get it. Tynissa, the Spider-Woman, and Salma, the Dragonfly Prince, are kind of the oldest. And while their archetypes are not the most unique, they are just so well written to where, while it feels comforting to see kind of the tropes of writing, you know, younger characters, they also feel fresh. And the dynamic between all of these characters, between the kids and their relationships to each other, with their relationships to Stenwald, it's just really, really well done. And so immediately, just with the different races, these different kinden, the other kinden that I haven't talked about really are the moth kinden, who, like, you know, they're all very drab and gray, and their eyes are just like white eyes that you can't, you know, they don't have any pupils, and they're hated. They walk the streets and people, like, throw rocks at them because, like, you know, they remember, and they're just, like, as I said, kooky shamans, but they're very in tune with, like, you know, the old magic or whatever. Because there's kind of like three forces at work. There's technology, which only the apt are skilled at, and so Stenwald and Totho and Che, Stenwald's niece, are good at technology. And then you have, like, Tynissa and Salma, who are not apt, and they can't really operate technology. But then you've got the art, which is kind of like as I said, that's like a racial ability. If we were playing D&D, it's an ability that only a member of their race gets, like the dragonflies and the wasps and the moths. And the beetles sometimes, but not usually, can fly. But the beetles can cling to things, the mantises can cling to things, spiders can kind of do, like, mental manipulation, the wasps have their sting. And then you've got magic, which is, like, you know, the old power from the age of lore that no one really believes in anymore. If it ever existed, it's definitely fled from the world. And that already, plus coupled with the race, is just absolutely fascinating. Oh, the ants' art is to, like, communicate as communally, to where they, like, share a hive mind, which is also super cool. So he's created this already awesome world that's really creative and really different. And as he reveals more and more of the societies that each of these races come from, Collegium is kind of like this melting pot of all of the races that just kind of come and hang out to learn and advance civilization. But all of these races racial homeland have these different cultures kind of ingrained in them. And he does this just really organically through how each of the characters react to certain things. The way Salma thinks it's ridiculous, the way the Beatles like write things on notes, like and toss paper away and send these written things flitting away, while his people in the Dragonfly Commonweal like treat writing as this great meditative endeavor, and they put a lot of thought into the things they write, and they only write things down very formally that's going to have some kind of impact. And just little stuff like that just shows the difference between how all of these races and these cultures work together. It feels like a very real, living, breathing world with its own history and its own culture. And he's just phenomenal at doing this. So, as I said, this book really kind of opens with Stenwald trying to convince the Collegium, from which like kind of everyone kind of takes their lead. Again, they're the cultural center of the Lowlands, and he's trying to convince everybody that the Wasps, according to his information, are on the move now that they're done with the Dragonfly Commonweal. And the Wasps have technology. It's not as good as Beetle technology. They're kind of behind the curve of the technological revolution, and the Wasp Empire is so fascinating, and Tchaikovsky obviously drew from these imperial powers of the past. First of all, you have this vast Wasp empire that just seems like everyone kind of united, very, very homogenous kind of population that is just so massive compared to the armies of the Lowlands. But the Lowlands, even if they were to acknowledge that the Wasps are a threat, are too busy infighting amongst themselves, like trying to gain superiority in their like political and mercantile games, that the Wasps will be able to come in and conquer them each piecemeal. And that's very similar to the freaking Persians back during the 5th century BC, where the Persians were so incredibly powerful, and every victory they got was because the Greeks could not agree. They could not put aside their dislike of each other to band together until they finally did and drove the Persians off. And so you see that, but you also see, and it's really bone-chilling in these opening chapters, seeing the people of Collegium be like, well, I mean, yeah, the Wasps went after the Commonweal, but the Dragonflies, I mean, they're weird, and they don't trade with us, and when we send people over there, they like won't meet with our emissaries, and they're really mean to us, and just freaking look at them, right? Like, look at those weirdos. Like, you know, we don't even know, like, what are they even thinking? Like, if they attacked the Dragonflies, they must have legitimately been concerned that the Dragonflies were going to make an attack on them. And, you know, we can't fault them for that. But meanwhile, the Wasps are one of our main customers. They buy our stuff, and they send emissaries to talk to us, to engage in, like, trade and peace treaties, and they're always so nice. And just look, these Wasp diplomats here, like, they dress like we expect them to. And I mean, you know what, like, in order to even like have that many soldiers, they must have really strong leadership. You know what, we kind of admire the strength of the leadership of the Wasps. And guys, like, okay, it felt super Neville Chamberlain appeasement. Oh, look at Mr. Hitler, like what a strong leader the Germans have. Like, it felt very Nazi. And Tchaikovsky does a really good job with this kind of political stuff. And I like that he explores human frailty and human failings, because the Wasps could easily just be, they are the faceless empire, they're the bad guys, like, there's like, obviously, let's band together against the evil empire and overthrow it, or whatever. But instead, we have these people who they kind of understand. Like, obviously they wouldn't if the Wasps were on their door, but they're like, these weird foreigners we don't know, like, they must have deserved it. Like, well, they wouldn't come for us. We're their friends. Like, that's a difficult thing to explore, and I think Tchaikovsky does it fantastically. And I like Stenwald because he's a speech maker, obviously, but one of the other reasons, the main reasons I like Stenwald as well, is because he is so flawed. Even Stenwald, who does not understand like why these people are so racist against the dragonflies and why they are so pro-fascist concerning the wasps, we see that Stenwald himself also is really prejudiced. And we see this, like, there's a heartbreaking moment where he can't control his thought, his, like, the racist thoughts that jump into his head later in the book. And it's really good. Like, Stenwald is a flawed character. He is not this noble pillar of virtue. He is our protagonist. He does stand in opposition to the wasps, but he himself has so many internal prejudices and internal failings. He's a flawed character, as all of them are. And this is one of the brilliant things that Tchaikovsky does. The themes of imperialism and racism and slavery are just rampant all throughout this book. And it is just such an interesting study in flawed characters, because even the characters we feel bad about because they're treated poorly, because like Totho is treated like badly by nearly everybody that isn't in his immediate circle because he's a half-breed. Like, everyone hates the half-breeds. But then when we come into contact with one of the moth races, the moths are already, like, elsewhere in the Lowlands, waging these kind of ideological guerrilla hit and runs on races of the apt, like the beetles and like their foundries and mines, because they are so ideologically opposed, the wasps and their hatred of technology. And so Totho, who has been a victim of racism and hate his entire life, sees this moth and has similar hatred, hates him purely for like what he represents, and this abhorrence of the technology that Totho loves. So even our characters that are put upon find someone else that they despise. There's so much realistic kind of xenophobia and racism running through these cultures. The spiders and the mantises are sworn, like blood-sworn enemies. The moths and the beetles despise each other because it's just like, you know, apt versus inapt, just a complete clash of ideologies where you can never. The moths hate this other kinden that I can't really talk about more even than they hate the apt, because they've always hated them because of how useless they are. Everyone kind of hates the imperial wasps at times. You know, the civilized apt hate the dragonflies because they're weird and unfriendly. Like, there's so much of that throughout, and Tchaikovsky handles it just really well. People, like, everyone is flawed, but not only is everyone flawed, we see our protagonists kind of like grapple with that and rise above it in the ways they know how. They grow and they understand that, like, they have to face and deal with their prejudices, because otherwise, like, they cannot stop the wasps without a united front. So a lot of prejudice are going to end up having to be set aside, and it's just a fantastic exploration in there. Even Che, who is like, she's our underdog, the little beetle that's not really good at anything. Like, you know, she's got a crush on handsome dragonfly Salma, but like doesn't understand that they don't use technology and they don't like know how to do anything. And it's not even it's not intended. She doesn't hate the dragonflies, but she is still like casually, like racially insensitive to the dragonfly people for being like, don't you want to be civilized? And it's just like, whoa, poor racist Che. But that's how she's brought up. Like, it's just this it's that cultural racism that like Commander Sam Vimes has in Man-at-Arms, to where it's like, it's prejudice of just, you don't really understand that you're being that way. It's just, you know, you don't understand why anybody would want to be any different. It's just so good. Tchaikovsky just does such a good job. So it also explores. He also explores these themes of slavery. The apt races do not keep slaves. The ants don't have slaves. The beetles don't have slaves. I don't think the dragonflies have slaves either, even though they're not apt. But then we have the wasps who take everybody's slave. We have the spiders who keep slaves. The mantises who used to keep slaves and I guess don't really anymore since they fell out of power, I guess. But there are, the races that keep slaves and the races that don't keep slaves, like literal slaves. But then, like, there's this city, Helaron, that is just like this uber industrial, uber capitalist, uber mercantile city. It is the center hub of trade. And one of its main customers is the Imperial Wasp army, even though it's a lowland city. And they're like, are you kidding? The Wasps are our best customers. Like, we don't pick a side. We supply whoever, we'll supply gear we'll supply tech to whoever's paying for it. And this frustrates Stenwall, because he's like, okay, one day the Wasps are going to show up to your city, and they're going to take over you with the tech and weapons that you literally sold to them. That can't remind us of anything, right? We as a world have never, armed people who have then, used those weapons against us. That's never happened. So you may have to stretch your ability to tolerate incredulous things in order to see that part. But it's just this, everything is for the dollar. People sell each other out. There's no bonds of family or friendship or anything. Everything is for the almighty coin. Give me some of that sweet, sweet coin. And you know what? The Wasp coin spends just as good as beetle or ant coin. Money, 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 money. But in that city, in order to produce all these goods, you have all of these factory jobs, these really low-paying work for these it's kind of skilled labor, but they're not super educated, like these beetles that just work in this factory. And there's this big discussion of they're like, no, we're the beetles, we don't have slaves. And it's like, okay, but these guys literally can't go anywhere. They can't afford to not work. They have to work. They have no choice other than to work in these factories. So they're kind of slaves in all but name. They're slaves to the factory, even though they're not slaves. And that kind of figurative versus literal slavery is just prevalent kind of throughout, and he handles it really, really well. And so there's this great exploration of imperialism and people's response to imperialism, about how an empire can literally fool everyone into not thinking it's expansionist, and how that could possibly happen. Because we're like, how could that happen? Well, we literally have historical evidence about how that can happen. You look at you just look at the Nazis, or Japan during its imperial phase, any of that. It's gonna be fine. It's not gonna be fine. But through Thalric, we learn about the Wasps. He's our insight into kind of the Wasp empire, and it really Tchaikovsky really explores loyalty and what loyalty is, because Thalric is an empire. Everything is for empire, and Thalric has done horrible things, and in the name of empire, he's killed, children, men, women, and children. He's betrayed cities. He's, killed tons of people in battle. He's done what he's had to do, but it's all been for empire. And it's so interesting to see characters on this side of the line, because he doesn't view anything he's done as immoral. No, he hasn't done anything wrong. He's not a bad guy. Are you kidding? He's a good guy, because for him, the good thing to do, the right thing to do, is to obey the empire. Obey the empire. You do everything for king and country. And as long as you're doing what the empire commands, what you are doing cannot, ipso facto, then be wrong. It can't be. It is on its face and by its nature the right thing to do. And so we see Thalric, who lives for empire and lives for that kind of loyalty, and we see how he kind of reconciles his maybe deeper personal feelings versus his identity as a soldier of the empire. And he is just a great antagonist. Tchaikovsky takes him in some interesting, unexpected ways, the way he thinks, how he is both human and tool. We learn that the Wasps, what their view of possession, what any imperial state views as possession. It's not just lands that are theirs and tech that is theirs. It's people belong to them as slaves. Ideas belong to them to do with what they will, to snuff out or promote as they will. Very concepts belong to empire. So through Thalric, Tchaikovsky asks, how far can your loyalty to empire be pushed? Does every person have a breaking point? Is it possible for someone to be loyal to the very concept of empire? Or are all imperials loyal insofar as they are going to reap the rewards of empire. Is empire itself something to strive for, something to be loyal to? Or are you loyal to the empire only from the fruit that you can harvest from being on the winning side? And is that loyalty at that point, or are you just in it to win it? As I said, there's so much depth to all of these characters. Their relationships and interactions with each other are so realistic and well drawn. And Tchaikovsky writes this at a pretty breakneck pace. Scenes that would normally take, like there's one section of the book where one character is like indebted to this like gang, and in other fantasy books, that would be the whole book, is this person working off their debt. Instead, it lasts a couple of chapters, blessedly so. We do get, like, characters get separated and then reunited. There is some build-up after the first like 3 chapters. There is some build-up that's like 150 pages maybe or so. But then everything gets going and it just does not let up. There are some phenomenal confrontations, both militaristic and emotional confrontations, as people deal with hurt and prejudices and desires and wants and just feelings of inadequacy. There are some fantastic character moments. There is an action scene that is just like, I couldn't breathe as I was turning the page, like, oh my god, it's like the longest chapter in the book. It's just like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? And I was just like, the conclusion sets up immediately, like, oh my gosh, where are we going from here? It's just so good. Now, it is not a perfect book. It is his first book. His prose is weaker here than in Guns of the Dawn. I did not notice it a ton the way people like Angela or some of my other friends that are reading it did. He is prone to info dumps at some times, where they will just randomly talk about some aspect of the culture just to kind of fill us in. Info dumps don't bother me, but there are a lot of them in here. If they bother you a lot, they're never very long. Like, they're not pages and pages. It's like paragraphs, but they're kind of long paragraphs. So that is there. There is also, the worst part of this book is a single plot line that I don't like at all, because it involves one of the characters kind of like derailing the plot for a reason that is not really well explained. I'm hoping that it gets explained in the next book, because the reason that this character diverts their attentions is not a good one, in my opinion, especially when similar threads involving like feelings and stuff were really fleshed out. This particular one isn't, and it sucks, because the character I really like that ends up kind of sidelining themselves. So I don't like that plot at all, but I'm hoping it's resolved satisfactorily in the next one, and that it doesn't kind of like derail the awesomeness that could be the next book's plot. So that it comes in, it's a plot thread like that appears in like the last third of the book, and it's just like, why is this here? It's very strange. Again, I didn't write this whole series. Apparently the first 4 books tell a complete arc, and Tchaikovsky had, from what I understand, had those 4 written before the first one was ever published, so that's probably why. But I am so excited to see the 10-book narrative that this thing is telling. If the books just get better, guys, I am so freaking excited. This is a fantastic book. If you do not like military fantasy, it is about war, and it is about supplying war, and the political side of war, and the military side of war. It is a book about war and the characters within it. Like, there's a lot of war. If you don't like that, don't be surprised if you read it and don't enjoy it. Like, you have to like it at least a little bit. And I understand, it's not for everybody. But there's a lot of war. And Tchaikovsky writes these battle scenes. They're tense and exciting. Just really, really good, guys. Really, really good. Guys, on the Kingfin approval system, I give this book, you know what? I'm going to give it a superb minus. So it's still in the superb category, but like if the other ones are like even better, I can like have them grow. But out of 5 stars, I give it 5 stars. Guys, if I end up giving every one of these books in this 10-book series 5 stars, like, I'm not even sure the weight of my 5-star strumpitude would not just completely crush my innards. It is a fantastic book. It is so good. It is so good. So guys, remember, this is the book for the August of the Apt Read Along. We are going to have this Sunday at 12 p.m. Central Time. We will be having our live show to discuss this book, and if you've been reading along with us, please come and talk to us about it. My guests for this live show will be Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, Joe from Average Joe's Library, and Dom from Dominish. And Dom is the only one of us who's read all of the books. So please, if you read this book, did you like it? Guys, if you have read past the first book, and especially if you read the whole series, please understand that in a book that is, in a series that is military fantasy, in war, people die. If you talk about characters in later books, you are inadvertently spoiling these people's survival. We should be afraid when reading books about war that any of our characters should die. So please refrain from telling me that these characters in later books do this, and like even mentioning a character in book 1 that is in book, I don't know, like 8 or something. You have revealed that that person survives that whole time. Please refrain from doing that, because I would love to just be on edge on whether or not these characters are going to survive. If you like military fantasy, guys, or if you're a fan of Tchaikovsky, even if you've only read his sci-fi, I cannot recommend this book enough. When I finished this book, I lamented that I am on BookTube and that I, run read-alongs and do buddy reads, because if I was not on BookTube, I would have immediately picked up book 2 and then 3 and then 4 after that. Like, I would have binge read these. I'm still kind of mad that I can't just read all of them, because that's what I would really want to be reading right now. But it's fine. It's close to the end of the month, and at the Dragonfly Falling will probably be one of the first books I read in September. So guys, as always, information about my Patreon and Discord is down in the description, and I'll see you next time, guys.